Hello everyone, I'm Tanya and I'm a medieval embroiderer. Now, if you go on social media, there are quite a lot of people who say that they do medieval embroidery, and often they mean that they do medieval images but with modern stitches or with modern materials. I try very much to stick to medieval stitches, medieval materials, and also medieval colours. So most of the wool embroideries that I'm going to be talking about today are ones where I dye the threads myself using natural colours that would have been available in the Middle Ages. I started doing embroidery when I was about 15, and I started doing medieval embroidery when I was about 17 or 18. And like a lot of people who do a little bit of reenactment, especially early medieval reenactment, I started off doing bits of the Bayeux tapestry, which is what this one is here. This is a little knight from the Bayeux tapestry, which I did for my second book, which is called Bayeux Stitch. I don't actually like the name Bayeux Stitch, and I never really use it very much. I use the term laid and couchwork, which is a more technical description that refers to the type of stitch that's used. And the reason I don't like the term Bayeux Stitch is when you say Bayeux Stitch, it makes people think that the stitch was only ever used for the Bayeux tapestry. And it wasn't. It was used for hundreds and hundreds of years all over Europe throughout the Middle Ages until it eventually became part of the repertoire of stitches in Jacobean crewel work. And for a very long time, actually, I didn't do any bits of the Bayeux tapestry because in my mid-20s, when I've been doing this sort of thing for a few years, I kind of lost track of how many people at reenactments would see my tent from about 20 meters away and see me doing embroidery, and they'd get closer and you could hear them going, "Ugh, not another bloody Bayeux tapestry." So I started looking at other things, and one of the things I did was, and somebody did say, "Oh, that's terribly rude," and I thought, no, they kind of have a point because it is kind of done to death in reenactment. So I started doing other things, and one of the things that I had in my sights for a very, very long time to do a replica of was this piece over here, which is a replica of an antipendium, which is Latin for altar frontal, from Reykjavík in Iceland. And when I first saw this, I thought it was much, much earlier. And this is kind of a significant piece of embroidery for me because it's when I really started taking things very, very seriously. So when I did this, I threw out all my commercially dyed Appleton's crewel wools and I naturally dyed all of these threads myself, which is something I've been doing for a while, but I hadn't really been using it on a major scale. And part of the reason I did that is there are people who do naturally dyed embroidery threads, but I was skint at the time and I realized that I couldn't afford to buy that much of their beautiful but very expensive thread. So I dyed my own. This is actually from the 14th century when Iceland was a colony country. It was subject to the rule of another nation, and I think it was Denmark. But for a long time, they were quite impoverished and they weren't allowed to have money. So they had a very complex barter system, which sometimes involved textiles. And the reason, many reasons, I wanted to do this one was firstly because we had a little reenactment church and I wanted an altar frontal for it. But there are many things about this that really appeal to me. Firstly, it's laid and couchwork. It's the technique of the Bayeux tapestry, but it's not the Bayeux tapestry. It's something else. It's different and it's something people hadn't seen before. And secondly, when I first started doing medieval embroidery, I was very much told there is laden couchwork and then there is opus anglicanum, which is this technique with the silk and gold. And it was sort of neither the two shall meet. But this piece uses both of those techniques in the same piece. So if you look closely at it, and you might see that little bits of it shine, the faces and the hands of all the figures are done in silk inlay in the Opus Anglicanum technique, which I'll come back to later. And I like it because when you get this in candlelight, it gives the impression almost of a Russian icon painting with that little glow around the face. And when I did this, I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to do this really quickly because I've done bits of Bayeux tapestry before. And the stitch is designed to cover large areas very quickly. And if anybody wants to come later on, I have brought a piece in progress and I can show you a little bit closer too, but I'm not going to show you how to do the technique as part of the talk because you won't be able to see it very well. You need to come closer. So it was this combination of the two as well. But I thought this was going to take me 6 months, and it took me a year and a half. Because what I hadn't realised, this is so much more densely packed and complex than the Bayeux tapestry. Because if you look at this knight from the Bayeux tapestry, he's not only got the entire background done in negative space, but parts of the figures are often done in negative space as well. And they're just left as plain canvas. There isn't a spot of plain canvas on this. All of the background is filled in. But what really, really took the time with this one was the outlining, because this has double and triple outlinings. And often that's used in a fashion which emphasizes the importance of certain figures. So if you look at the final panel of the flight into Egypt, because this whole thing is a cartoon strip of the Virgin Mary's life. So her birth is here, the birth of Jesus is there, and this is the flight into Egypt. You can see that Mary and baby Jesus are the most important people in this picture, so they get triple outlines that makes them go, look, look, we're important, wee! And poor old Joseph in the corner here, single outline, no halo even. From what I've read, he ought to think himself quite lucky that he's not wearing stripes, because I read somewhere that he's often shown wearing striped trousers, because in medieval art and literature, stripes often indicate ambiguity. And the major question in the mind of your average medieval man was not, is Joseph a good bloke because he stood by his girl and helped the baby? No, it's, was he cuckolded by God? So the ambiguity of the stripes was apparently about him potentially being a cuckold. But one thing I come back to again and again is the very cartoonish nature of medieval embroidery. And that's partly in the way it uses this kind of symbolism of, you know, picking out the most important figure and making them more detailed and bigger, and partly in this sort of narrative element of telling a story, which you see again and again and again in medieval art and medieval literature and medieval embroidery. And I mean, that was partly to do with most people being illiterate, and they would have had, although they couldn't read words, I think they would have had a much more sophisticated understanding of how to read images than the average modern person does. So this also shows something that I come back to again and again and again, and I bang on to the point of nerdiness in my books, that there is a rhythm to the way medieval art uses colour. I think some modern embroiderers embroider as a side hobby to trying to collect all however many hundred colours there are of DMC stranded cotton. And there is a temptation when you have that many colours available to you to just throw them all at an image. But this uses about 7 or 8 colours, and it uses them quite repetitively so that they make a very cohesive image. And when I'm doing my own work in medieval designs and medieval style, I always bear that in mind of not to use too many colours, because there is a rhythm to the way colour is used, not just in stitching, but in all medieval art, that they don't use lots and lots of colour. And there's a simplicity to it that's actually very liberating when you're working with it, because I've seen people sit there and not be able to make a decision for hours, even weeks on end, because they can't decide which one of 10 shades of blue to use. If you're doing medieval embroidery, you've got blue. You can use the blue or you cannot use the blue. And if that blue runs out and the next shade of blue is slightly different, tough, you use the blue. And it's really, really liberating. It's really freeing because you can just get on with it and there's no bother. This is one of my most important pieces, I think, for me personally, of laden couchwork. But I also use it in other ways, in bigger pieces. And when I was working on that one, I was corresponding with the chap in the museum that holds the piece. And he basically knew nothing about it. So I had to reconstruct which colours I was using just on a knowledge of what colours were available to medieval people. And when I was about halfway through it, I'd automatically done it on a linen canvas because that's what you use in modern embroidery. And that's what the Bayeux tapestry is done on. And halfway through, I found another piece of information which said that that piece was done on homespun wool. I thought, well, that's interesting. So the next piece I did after that, and this shows you how complicated that one is, because this is exactly the same technique. This took 3 months. I did on Manx tweed, which was the closest thing I could get to a hand-woven white wool. And it was a revelation. Because when you sew wool onto a linen canvas, there's kind of a drag, there's a roughening that, you know, it just sort of, you know that you're pulling thread through cloth. This is like, there's no drag. It's an absolute joy to sew wool on wool. And it was so pleasurable and so enjoyable that I barely ever use linen anymore when I'm sewing wool. I do all my kits on wool canvas because it's nicer. And it's really, really pleasurable to work on. This one is an example of some of the work I do based on manuscript illustrations. So this is based on Beatas of Labina's Apocalypse, and this page that I've reproduced shows the Noah's Ark. And there are lots of things about this that appeal to me. I love the way it's like a cross-section of a doll's house, and it bears absolutely no resemblance whatsoever to any boat you've ever seen. But also I love the animals, because I always say if you're trying to draw a medieval horse and you draw it as though you've never seen a horse before, but you've just purchased one from IKEA because it's the latest thing, and you assembled it without looking at the instructions, it's going to look like a medieval horse. And the same applies to a lot of the other animals. So what we've got here is we've got an animal, an elephant, which is smaller, same size as a pony over here. That, believe it or not, is a pony. We've got, this could be a camel. On the other hand, it could be My Little Pony with a serious tumour. Over here, we've got a leopard. Leopards in medieval art are always cross-eyed, and a lion. And if you look at the look on that lion's face and the look on the leopard's face, I think what we have here is an obscure subspecies of lion. This is Leo flatulensis. He's just let one rip and left that leopard in his cloud of toxic fart gas. And the poor leopard's about to keel over. We've got over here, I have no idea what that is. For nearly 15 years, I've been calling that disco monkey. No clue. And up here, we've got Noah and his family. My partner is still sulking because due to an unfortunate mistranslation in Beatas of Labina's Apocalypse, he has portrayed the duck of peace instead of the dove of peace. And my partner is still sulking because I refused to put oranges on the olive branch for him. But I think this piece really shows how complicated the other one is because of how quickly it was done, and it's nearly the same size. It was done in slightly less than 3 months. So there are all sorts of pieces on the wall all around that are based on manuscripts and images. So this one here, if you're wondering why he's called the politician, it's because he's blowing hot air out of both ends. So you can decide for yourself which one's which on that one. One thing that I'm kind of partway through at the moment is a series of these large hangings, which are based on the Luttrell Psalter, which is a really famous medieval prayer book with music, which I just love the creatures in it because they're just strange and wonderful. And unlike a lot of medieval prayer books, there's no rudeness in the margins of the back of the Luttrell Psalter. There's one or two naked people, but there are no genitals, which is very unusual for a medieval book. Not that that's why I like it. I like it because the creatures are interesting and the people are interesting, but there is an incredibly rich seam of filth running through medieval art, which is the theme of my third book, which I wanted to call Mucky Medieval Embroidery, but my editor wouldn't have it. She said the Americans don't know what mucky means. But I mean, there are a lot of boobs, bums and willies in the third book, but it's not all just really obscene, because one of the things I'm really fascinated with is a type of medieval book called a bestiary, which is the medieval version of a David Attenborough book. It's all about nature and all about the world. So they have in them all sorts of creatures. So dragons are listed next to real animals like lions and griffins and, you know, those strange creatures with their faces in their chests. And I love all these weird and wonderful creatures, but one of the things I just have a real soft spot for, which I've just done for the third book, is this little chap here. This is one of the forgotten medieval mythical beasts. He's called a bonacon. And as you can see, he is a bull. And this bonacon is called Malcolm, because that's my dad's name. And my dad, not only is his star sign Taurus, but he has the same superpower as the bonacon. Because if you look at the bonacon here, his horns are curled back into his head like a ram. So he can't gore you the way a bull would gore a matador. So his defensive mechanism is he turns his back on you and emits a large toxic fart cloud that can kill everything for miles around. And my dad can do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to frame this up and give it to my dad for Christmas. But the Luttrell Psalter hangings, I'm actually doing a series of 6 of them. And this one was the first one. And I was really, really pleased with it when I finished it. But when I finished the other ones, this one now looks really bad because there is no less is more in medieval art. There is only more is more, because less is more makes no sense. More is more and more is good. And what's happened here is this was my first one, and you can see that I've taken creatures from all over the Psalter, from different parts of the Psalter, and I've made them talk to each other. But there are lots of gaps in this one. And I've learned to pack the creatures closer together as I've gone on with the designs. But this one does have some of my favourite creatures in it, because down the bottom we've got a little trio of dancing flying monkeys, which is a bone of contention in our relationship, because my partner trained as a genetic engineer and he outright refuses to make me flying monkeys. He says, I'm not responsible enough to be trusted with flying monkeys. I would just cause havoc and chaos. And when I was working on him, this little chap here with the leaves on his tail, I said to my partner, I said, see those 3 little berries there? He says, yeah. I said, do you think those are his testicles? And he goes, don't be ridiculous. Why would you design a creature with its genitalia on the outside of its body where it could be really easily damaged? And I thought 2 things. I thought, firstly, which one of us has the degree in biology? And secondly, have you looked in your own trousers lately, Pat? This little pink chap here, his name is Wilfred Manykex, and he is a Yorkshire flamingo. And you can tell he's from Yorkshire because he's not got 1 pair of thermals on, he's wearing 2. And I've been arguing with my friend Jim the Pot here whether or not this is a man trying to change his own duvet cover, which I think is a far more amusing answer than mine, which was, I think there is a certain element to the way medieval art is done that shows you that people are short-sighted, because I'm very short-sighted. And to me, that's the way a short-sighted person would see someone carrying a large sack over their back, the way Colemen used to. I'll try and remember to come back to that later. But I always put something modern in these literal psalter pieces because they are a modern version of a piece of medieval art, because these little creatures have been taken from all over the book and made to interact with each other. So let's put something modern in. So on this one, we've got this little chap on the nest of eggs is actually holding a Cadbury's cream egg. And the little goat here is wearing a bow tie. He just needed one. I don't know why. But the second one here is all the dragons from the Psalter are made to sort of interact and talk to each other. So this one down here, this was put in for my partner who grows carnivorous plants, because there is one that he grows called Nepenthes naga, which is Indonesian for dragon. So it's a dragon pot plant. So that's why there's a dragon pot plant, which has come from there. This one, I think, is always very interesting because in medieval art, this two-tone blue, green, grey skin is used as an indication of somebody who is not a good person. When you see the people torturing Jesus on the cross, they've always got these strange two-tone skins. And I'd always kind of assumed that medieval people would have been firmly of an anti-dragon kind of stance. But here you've got someone killing what's obviously kind of a larval form of dragon who is portrayed as evil. I think that's very interesting. I don't know what to make of it, but I think it's interesting. But up here, this gentleman here, there's this shows an incident in 1473. You know the sport you get at agricultural shows and garden fairs, welly wanging. Yeah. Well, before wellies were invented, people used to wang dragons. So this is Alfred Higginbottom, who was the old Yorkshire dragon wagging champion. And this shows the famed incident where he wanged his dragon all the way to Lancaster town centre and set fire to it. There was much ale drunk. This one up here is called Norman, after my granddad, whose middle name is Norman, but who never called by his first name. Because according to family legend, and according to my dad, it was one head and two bodies, and according to my auntie, it was two bodies and one head on a piglet that he had born once, which went to the agricultural college for study. And people don't spot the modern touch in this one, because up the side here, it says in Latin, Draco Dormiens nunquam titilandibus, which is the motto of Hogwarts School. Don't tickle a sleeping dragon. And then the third one is the music psalter. And the music psalter lent itself to far more modern touches than any of the others. And the one people also always spot is the kind of Kiss character up here with his bass guitar and his makeup. But right next to him, there's three faces of David Bowie. There's a bat out of hell. There's the Grateful Dead. There's Jethro Tull, Pet Shop Boys and Nirvana album covers. You've got a Blues Brother up there, and you've got the Rolling Stones on the top flag. And people often say, well, everybody here is playing music, so what's this guy got to do with anything? And I like to point out that if you've ever been to a rock concert, there's always at least one pothead in the corner. So that's what he's there for, you see. The third, fourth, and sixth ones. Number four's been on hold for a little while I do write books and stuff, but I'm getting back to it in the next week or so. The fourth one is Peasants, and we've got the Ploughman's Boy in Burberry plaid and Nike high tops, and the windmill's got a satellite dish on it and stuff like that, and video cameras everywhere. And for a long time, I was struggling with what to do with the princes, because there are a lot of scenes of sort of courtly goings on in the Luttrell Psalter that are about Sir Geoffrey Luttrell's life. But there's a really famous plate from the book, it's one of the showpieces, which shows Sir Geoffrey being dressed for the joust, and he's on his horse with the beautiful caparisons all over it. And I was reading a book about how basically jousting in the Middle Ages was like the Formula One circuit of its day, and that there were even, you know, fashionable young it girls who were basically jousting groupies who followed the circuit round Europe. So I thought, well, right, that's it. I'm going to strip Sir Geoffrey's heraldry from him and just cover him in Formula One's corporate logos. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. I want to get the peasants finished now so I can do the princes. One of the things that I did to earn a living, which I don't do as much now, I do 1 or 2 a week these days, but I used to be out 5 days a week doing talks as a Viking lady in primary schools or a Roman lady. And I always had this problem. I'm sure there's 1 or 2 retired teachers in this room today, that the teacher would be trying to get 30 children to sit down. And they didn't want so-and-so sitting next to the other little so-and-so because they knew it would cause trouble. And it can take teachers a very long time to arrange children to their satisfaction. And if you do the actor thing, where you are a statue and you do not move and you do not respond, it genuinely actively pisses kids off. They really don't, especially little boys, who really do not like being ignored. But if I sit and I do a piece of embroidery, they come in and sit down. It's like magic. They come in and sit down and say, oh, the lady's knitting. And they wait for me to finish. It's amazing. So I started doing just split stitch wool embroidery in schools with the idea that I would do lots of small panels and stitch them together. So this is the only wool one in the exhibition which is actually done with commercially dyed wools, because this one was started before that one. And it's taken from a set of windows from Lausanne Cathedral in Switzerland, which is the labours of the month. So this is basically a farming calendar, and it tells you what you should be doing at each time of year on your farm. And while I was working on this one, I was looking at other labours of the months, and I realised that apart from sort of a few women working in the background in the Treasury Shire de Duc de Berry, they were all men, and they were all doing very male jobs. So I said, right, I'm going to do a women's labours of the month as well, which is the one next door. And a lot of people said, oh, there's this wonderful picture of a woman doing blacksmithing, or all these women doing men's jobs. And no, I want the women to be doing women's jobs. So what I did was I very carefully planned it so that the women would be doing jobs that corresponded to what the men are doing. So in January, you've got the Roman god Janus, because medieval people were aware of classical mythology, who is the god of 2 faces, who looks at the past and the future together. And then for January, for the women, I've put a woman spinning, which is a job women would have done all year round. But of course, if you know your classical mythology, it alludes to the myth of the Fates who spin the lives of men. So you've got Clothos who spins the thread, Lachesis who measures it, and when Atropos cuts it, you die. So I'd given her a baby to symbolise the new year. And while I was working on her, she said she wanted a cat. And then all the other ladies, because it was all planned out, they all said, we want cats as well. So they've all got cats that are either my friends or my friends' cats, or even my next door neighbour's cats, which is why the only things that have names on here, the people don't have names, the cats have names. So this one here for February, you've got the man is just sitting keeping warm, which is apparently the only thing you can do in February. But of course, she's a woman, so she's doing something useful. She's doing her sewing. It was meant to be a white cat on her embroidery, but it's very difficult to get a cat on that scale. So it ended up looking more like a mouse. But the reason it was meant to be a white cat is there's a wonderful Anglo-Saxon Irish poem about a monk who lives as a hermit and his only companion is his white cat, Pangaban. So I was thinking that she would be dressed as a nun and reading Pangaban and thinking about him. So all the jobs correspond, apart from when you get to June, July and August, because if you look at the male one, it's basically June, July and August that they're doing very similar jobs. They're mowing and threshing and harvesting. And I got really bored doing that much embroidered wheat in a row. So I gave the women some other jobs. So we've got June is doing her dairying. That's my cat, Branston. And July is actually in the fields, because one of the jobs that peasant women would have done around the harvest is they would have gone into the field after the corn was cut and done gleaning, which was picking up individual grains that had been dropped. And that could make a significant contribution to a poor household's food supply for the year. And then down in November, where he's slaughtering the animals for winter, I've got her converting them into sausages. So there is a sort of tenuous connection between all of them as they go along. But that one was done with naturally dyed threads. And I think it's a much more cohesive and much more pleasing image, because again, it's a much more limited colour palette, and the colours with natural dyes, if you put two commercially dyed colours together, they can look really, really horrible. And natural dyes just never do that. They always just seem to get along with each other. The other one that I've done in schools is the one that's in the far corner, which is a 9th century Byzantine zodiac. And basically, I did that because the image of Cancer the crab, which is not my star sign, and I don't know anyone in my family who is. Do you remember those old posters you used to get in primary school? Does your child have nits? With the magnifying glass. It's Cancer the nit. And honestly, I did that whole thing just based on the fact that Cancer the nit made me laugh. But that one, the original, was black and white with little touches of red ink, which is why I've kept the red where there was red and then used colours appropriate to the various houses of the zodiac. But unfortunately, it's meant that the sun in the middle, if you look closer later on, you'll see he does look a bit hungover. I think this is 3 a.m. in downtown Byzantium, and he's trying to hail a taxi cab home. I think the thing in his other hand is actually kebab. So the one behind me was this long scroll here, was the first time I sort of started to think of myself seriously as a textile artist rather than somebody who did embroidery, because I was invited down to the Bodleian Library in Oxford for an artist's open day. And it was to enter a competition. And at first I wasn't really very interested in it. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get anywhere because it's all going to be painters and nobody's interested in embroidery and they don't take it seriously as an art form. So I went down just for the free lunch and the chance to look at some medieval manuscripts because they were paying travelling expenses. And then I got really, really interested because what they were talking about was how all these wonderful medieval books, they're all made from the skins of primarily male sheep under the age of 6 months of age who were genetically useless to the shepherds, because one of the main uses of sheep in the Middle Ages was actually milking them. I mean, Wensleydale's supposed to be a sheep's milk cheese. Most of our Yorkshire cheeses would have been sheep's milk. And so I got really interested in this idea of these little baby sheep. So I decided to draw an ABC for the education of baby sheeps in the Middle Ages. And it's all supposed to be things that are to do with books. And I did it in a sort of mixed media medieval embroidery style. So I've used lots and lots of gilded leather, which was used a lot on appliques, which is kind of a lost medieval art form, really, because it doesn't survive. It wasn't valued as highly. So it's all things to do with sheep. So I reused an Alfred jewel. I actually did this in a month and made the deadline for the competition by about 24 hours because I did one square a day. So the Alfred was reused from a class I taught at the Ashmolean based around the Alfred jewel. I got some parchment and I made a little book out of parchment, and I'm afraid I'm not a calligrapher, so I used Sharpies. But I also misspelled Bodleian, which is one of the B's, so I put a little asterisk at the bottom putting scribal errors is authentic in it. I've got cats and dragons, English and French. With the holes are there because one of the things that they were talking about at the Bodleian was flay holes, where the animal had had a cut or there'd been an accident when they were skinning it to make the parchment. And you don't see them on the really prestigious books like the Luttrell Psalter, but on the day-to-day books, in the sort of less important pages, you get these holes, and the scribes would repair them. And they basically use buttonhole stitch to darn them together. So H was for holes, because this has always fascinated me, this use of embroidery in medieval books. The jewels were ones that I set myself and put them in, because you often get jewels on the covers of medieval books. Marginalia, of course, because that's one of my major obsessions. So the little walking fish, they turn up a lot in medieval marginalia. He's got a little speech bubble that says Bleeding Darwin in his bright ideas, because he doesn't look happy. We've got repairs again, because often they would stitch two pieces of parchment together when they wanted a scroll and it wasn't big enough. My favourite panel, to be honest, is the Tremulous Hand of Worcester, who is a famous bad handwriting medieval scribe whose work is all in the Bodleian. And I had struggled and struggled for ages. What do I use for tea? And I couldn't think of anything. And then one of my students at the Ashmolean, she said, Tremulous Hand of Worcester. But that doesn't make a very good picture, which is why you've got Tremulous Hand of Worcester sauce. And then the last one, which was a drawing, because I was running out of time by that time, was Dan Wakelin from the Bodleian said that no matter what their exhibition is at the Bodleian Library, they will always include a zodiac man, who are these figures with the different star signs placed on different bits. So Gemini rules the hands, so it goes on your arms. And Scorpio rules the genitals, so he's generally biting on Zodiac Man's willy. So, and he said they always put one of these things in because they were meant to sort of affect how you were treated medically. And I was running out of time, so I did a little Zodiac Man at the end there. The piece was shortlisted, but I didn't win. But I was just amazed to get shortlisted in like a proper grown-up art competition with a piece of embroidery. This one sort of crosses over the border between Leyden couchwork and Opus Anglicanum. Opus Anglicanum means English work, and it was what the English were famous for from Anglo-Saxon times right up until the 14th century, when the Black Death affected the industry very badly. And it's this style with the gold and the silk faces. And my editor actually cut one of my favourite lines from the introduction of my first book, because what I'd said was, Opus Anglicanum is just split stitch silk and underside couching. But in the words of Bananarama, it's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. So, and it is, like most medieval embroidery, it uses very, very simple stitches in a very, very sophisticated way. But I'm a bit of a pedantic nerd when it comes to Opus Anglicanum, because I've seen things. I mean, there was a piece entered in the Broderers exhibition a couple of years ago that somebody had called Opus Anglicanum, but to me it wasn't, because she'd used the wrong type of silk. When academics talk about Opus Anglicanum, they talk about the way the light bounces off the gold. And they don't talk about the way that the light bounces off the silk, because the silk in original pieces is so degraded that it's lost all its shine. But if you look at the bricks around this piece or the bricks on this one, you see how they move with the light. Or each one of those bricks is only made of one colour of silk. And it's the type of silk that's used for Opus Anglicanum is called flat silk or reeled silk, because what it is it is silk that is reeled directly off a silkworm's cocoon without being twisted. So the vast majority of the silk that you get for stitching and weaving and embroidery is twisted. And that twist cancelled out about 75% of the shine. So to me, it is only Opus Anglicanum if you use the correct type of silk, because only that silk brings light into the work. So it's not just about painting and the light bouncing off the gold. It's about light on silk. And when you're working Opus Anglicanum, you should never be able to see a single individual stitch. It's not about the soloist, it's about the chorus. What you're thinking about is how to work banks of silk so that they reflect the light. One of the things that I did for the first book was I made this thing here. I call this Big Ed and Little Ed. So Little Ed is done the right size and using the filament silk, whereas Big Ed is kind of, he's done as a stitch map. He's a contour map to show you how the stitches ought to work. Because many years ago, I was reading a book, and I've forgotten the name of the chap who wrote it, but it was called Medieval Modern. And he was talking about the influence of medieval art on modern art, because medieval art uses surrealism and symbolism and all sorts of weird stuff that 20th century art thinks it invented, but it didn't. And he was talking about how Picasso was heavily influenced by medieval art. Specifically, he said Opus Anglicanum. I genuinely did not get it. And then a couple of weeks later, I went to stitch an Opus Anglicanum face. And what you do is you break the face down into its geometric components. So you have a circle for the cheek. I mean, his is not a circle because he's old and it's saggy. You have a triangle for the nose. You have a block for the forehead. You have another circle around the muzzle. And that's exactly what Picasso does in some of his portraits. And then I got it. So it's all about using light and the way it reflects off the silk. And one of my aims in writing the first book was to try and revive Opus Anglicanum as an art, because it's seen as this thing that is used in medieval paintings, but I think it just has so much potential and you can have so much fun with it. So as well as doing the replica pieces like this one here, which is based on part of the Scion Cope, and the Three Kings at the end, which I think is the Bologna Cope, a lot of these original pieces have foreign names because during the Reformation of the Church, they were destroyed to recover the gold that was in the thread. So the ones that survive tend to be ones that were given as diplomatic gifts to popes or bishops in other countries. So you have the Bologna Cope and the Siena Cope, and they come from all over the world, but they were all produced in this country and sent out into the world. And they're now very, very rare survivals, but I was at a conference at St. John's in Oxford, which was about their vestments, and someone there was cataloguing how many vestments you had in your average parish church. And he said that the average parish church had 60 copes, these big capes that bishops wear, just for the parish priest and his associated clergy to wear. I mean, in an ordinary church, they probably weren't the gold ones. They probably would have just been plain silk. But if a parish church has that many, how many is a cathedral going to have had? So it just shows you how much was destroyed. So this one, the rather odd angel, which my partner hates because it's asymmetrical, this is also based on the Scion Cup, these little cherubs into space. They have 6 wings. And the reason my partner hates it is he's not balanced. All of his wings are different. So he was done as a sampler to show the different ways that wings can be treated, because the variety is absolutely infinite in Opus Anglicanum. But I did explain to him that actually on the Scion Corps, some of the cherubs do have mismatched wings. I think it's just 2 people doing a different wing each and just not looking at what the other one were doing. And they've just messed it up. But you can see from these how much that the light bounces off them. And it is that painting with light that I think is just as important to Opus Anglicanum as the gold. And I've been trying to do more sort of modern interpretations of medieval things. So when I was doing the book, I had a random goth moment and did the little skeleton down there. And I started researching medieval skeletons. And I was sort of reminded of this story of the 3 living and the 3 dead, which basically the story goes, there's three young men and they're gambling and whoring and drinking and doing all the things that young men will do if they're left to themselves. And they go out into the forest and they meet three walking dead, these shambling corpses of kings in some versions, who say to the three young men, "We were once as you are now, but we were so wicked, death will not take us, and we are condemned to walk the earth forever." And I read this story and I thought, do you know, I don't think young men now would learn anything from that. So I had the sketch for this one was on the mantelpiece for 3 months while I was finishing books off. And I took the tale, and these three are from an original illustration of the three living and the three dead. And I've transported it to the inner city because I thought young men don't go out into the country anymore. And I've put the green man in the keystone as the forest, the remnant. I actually saw Earth is flat scrawled on the back of a road sign on the A1 near Catterick. So I just thought that was hilarious and put that in. And I had to do a lot of research for this one, believe it or not, because I had to research modern urban streetwear. And then it was quite challenging taking modern clothing and portraying it in a medieval style. So I had great fun with the camo trousers. My partner's favourite thing about this, believe it or not, my favourite bit of embroidery I've ever done is the rat eating McDonald's chips. He loves that. But this one was exhibited at the Broaderers exhibition, and then it went to the Fine Art Textiles Award, which again, I didn't expect to even get shortlisted because their emphasis is very much on the modern and the abstract and the minimalist. And it won the runner-up prize, which is innovative use of textiles, which I thought was hilarious because there isn't a stitch in there that wasn't available to the 14th century. And although I've used some modern passings, like the copper isn't really traditional for Opus Anglicanum, I wanted that brick colour on the back. It is very much it is a medieval piece of embroidery. I actually use real copper thread on there because I'm very interested in the way sometimes threads tarnish. So that has darkened quite a lot since I did it. And I quite like the idea of it going really dark, like a sort of dirty urban building that you get before they've been sandblasted. So one of the things that shows on here is you see this ground texture. This is another way of using light on silk because this is tiny, tightly worked circles of silk, then packed together. And when the V&A had its Opus Anglicanum exhibition about 10 years ago, people were studying the faces, and I was thinking, I've studied the face for years, I'm not interested in those so much. I was studying the ground, and I hadn't realised, because books don't normally show pictures of the ground. They show pictures of the faces and the drapery and the hands, because that's what people are interested in. But to get the whole picture, you need to look at the whole picture. So this technique had long been aware of being used for things like the dapples on horses. And sometimes it's one colour, sometimes it's two or three. So this one, like the original, you can see that the three coloured one is used on the horse's rump, and then the one colour version is used on its neck. And again, it's about manipulating the light and the way you use the stitches. So I actually, one of the things I was most pleased with that was actually the tarmac, believe it or not, which is, I know this makes it sound like such a nerd, doesn't it? But that one's had a bit of a life of its own because it was used by the Fine Art Textiles people for all their publicity rather than using the winner, because the winner was a white cloth with tea stains on it and a 3-page essay about dining together as a family. So I think I need to study how to write an artist statement, because my artist statement for that was, I do medieval embroidery, sometimes I muck about with it. I really need to work harder. This one, the lady in the unicorn, was actually done for occasionally I teach an online class. And I started this one, it was based on, there are many, many original manuscripts of unicorns being hunted. And the idea is that unicorns like virgins. For some reason, they only like female ones. I'm sure they must like male ones as well. But the virgin is put in the woodland and is used to lure the unicorn in so the hunters can kill it because the horn is valuable. So I had the original version of this, the cartoon for it, was based on the manuscript, and it had 3 men driving spears into the poor unicorn. And I was nearly in tears because the unicorn is looking at her the way my cat looks at me. It's just such a look of utter trust. So I thought, right, that's just making me cry. And I talked to a few people and I said, no, it's not very nice. Don't want to do that. So I replaced the hunters with these 3 animal musicians who turn up a lot in medieval marginalia. And it's not just cats, dogs, and rabbits. There's cows and horses playing all sorts of things as well. Unfortunately, I think it backfired because the poor unicorn is still being tortured because the dog is playing the bagpipes, so he's on Scottish folk music. This one's on Irish folk music, and the rabbit's playing jazz. They're not even trying to play the same tune. The poor unicorn. And this one is another favourite, which I did last Christmas. This is the Lady and Cat, patron saint of worm and flea treatments. Because one thing I'd never done was the classic medieval Virgin and Child, which is a lovely image. But when you look at the babies, medieval babies are right little mingers, they're hideous. I just thought, I don't want to do that. So I put a cat in instead, and it's got a paw and a nose, and she's got a little pill. She's got one single pearl for his pill, and she's trying to give it to the cat, you see. So this is what I mean about mucking about with things and playing with things. But the gold work in Opus Anglicanum is not done in the same way as modern gold work. Modern gold work only stitches the gold threads onto the surface of the fabric. What underside couching does is with every stitch, you're using a really ugly linen thread that pulls a tiny little loop of gold underneath. So you can see it quite clear with this one because I've used a red metallic thread. And you see how it's got sort of little dots and nubbinses of the red on the back. You're pulling a tiny little bit of that through the work every time you do it. And there's a good reason for this. Because if you take a piece of modern couch gold work and you catch it on something, you can rip the entire bit of thread off. The most damage you can do to a piece of underside couching by catching it is maybe destroying 2 or 3 stitches, which are very quick and easy to repair. And most Opus Anglicana was not hung on the wall like we do now. It was worn and it was actively being used. So it was either used for bishops' copes and chasubles and things like that, or for purses like this one, which is an almoner purse, or aumônier if you're French, because it was used for giving alms to the poor. But basically what I say is these are the 14th century version of your Hermes Birkin. This is your designer handbag. And I've discovered a new way to make modern embroiderers wince. I did this the other day, and a woman in the second row physically flinched with, because if you do this to a piece of modern embroidery with gold work on it, you've ruined it because you're going to bend the gold threads. If you do it to a piece of Opus Anglicanum, it doesn't make any difference. And it's because the thread is already bent. It's tougher, it's more practical, and it's better for wearing. So that this little purse here is based on, I think, the Sienna cope. I like fairy tales, so this one was done in the book. So I've taken this Bible story and I've reduced it to Rapunzel. I've lengthened her hair, and she's saying no boys are allowed in my treehouse, you see. But the really, really complicated patterns that you see in medieval gold work, they're either post-Black Death when the style changes and it's done in surface couching, which is easier to make a pattern but not as durable, or they're done like this. Because I would say it's sort of 90% of underside couching is just done in this very, very simple brick arrangement of stitches. But patterns like this one can be created by working, half of that pattern is worked with the stitches vertically, and half of the pattern is worked with the stitches horizontally. And you can create some really, really complicated patterns that way. So this one is the same, but I did it in 2 slightly different colours of gold. And the bricks on the back of the Three Living and Three Dead are done in a similar technique, but that was a slight updating of technique because I had to put 4 textures in to be able to get the bricks in. But this one, this is from the 3rd book. This is the Harrowing Hell, and I think, you know, I think this is a loud book because it's got bottoms in it, and I think the bottoms show beautifully how silk can be modelled in Opus Anglicanum with the light. You can really see those buttocks; they really pop, don't they? But my partner does my photography for me, and this one actually led to a sort of half-hour stand-up blazing row because he was taking the photograph and he said, "These flames are wrong. Flames are hotter on the inside. It should be gold on the inside and red on the outside." And I said, "Well, it's based on an enamelled triptych, which has red enamel for the flames and gold around the outside." "Yes, but it's wrong." And I couldn't explain to him that science doesn't always apply to art, but he was getting very, very animated and stamping his little nerdy feet. Bless. So I ignored him.
I'm going to have to slightly draw you to, I feel very bad interrupting you.
Do you want me to shut up?
Well, no, sure there's have any questions for you that they can be asked before we finish today. I know you could talk endlessly. Your enthusiasm for your work is so engaging, and so thank you so much. But can I just ask, are there any questions for Tanya today? Are you all completely amazed? Yes, and you obviously need to come and have a look at the pieces. Pauline.
Yeah. Thank you for a really amazing talk. It's interesting how your knowledge about medieval art and culture is amazing. When I saw some of these little figures, it reminded me of the artist Hieronymus Bosch. I mean, is there a connection there? Did you get any ideas?
He was influenced. He was part of medieval art, so he was drawing on what was already existing around him in marginalia and stuff. So all those creatures with little bums in their face and stuff, they turn up everywhere.
Yeah.
But he just I think he concentrates them more because he's interested in these sort of nightmare worlds and hellscapes and things.
Thank you.
Tanya, someone online wants to know the title of your book.
The first one is called Opus Anglicanum. The second one is called Fire Stitch, and the third one is going to be called Naughty Medieval Embroidery.
And I imagine if they Google Tanya Bentham, they will get the titles. Yes, do.
Can I ask a basic question? How do you start an embroidery? Do you get your fabric? Do you draw the picture?
I draw the picture. It depends what I'm going to be doing with the picture. I mean, that one was very carefully planned out because there's a lot going on in a small space. So it was redrawn several times. And if I'm doing it for kit, then I have to do a very precise drawing because I'm going to need to reproduce it. These ones, though, because, I mean, people have asked me, are you going to do kits of them? And the answer is no, because they're a fortune. These ones, what I do is I masking tape the canvas to a large sheet of plywood in the living room, and I go through. My dad bought me a replica copy of the literal Psalter, and I take photographs of all the creatures that fit my theme, and I take about 5 times as many photos as they need, and I have those just scattered all around the living room, and I just draw it with a fabric marker and draw it directly onto the canvas. So those ones really aren't reproducible because they're just drawn freehand. It does sometimes lead to little problems because with the music sampler, I used an actual piece of music from the Psalter, but I draw from the bottom up. For some reason I can't draw from the top down. I have to draw these from the bottom upwards. So I was leaving gaps to put music in. And then when I started to draw the music in, I realised I hadn't left enough space for the tune that I'd chosen. And it's only half the tune. But then I can't read medieval music anyway, so it's probably out of tune.
Did medieval embroiderers include their own personalised touches? And do you think that they had fun?
I think they did have fun. But whether or not they were allowed to put their personalised touches in is a really good question, but one I'm not sure of the answer of. A lot of them were working in workshops, so these big ultrasound Carnum cults, we know that there would be 30 or 40 people working on one thing. One of the
Guys at St John's had a wage list for the people who worked, and it was roughly half men and women. And obviously the men were paid about 10 times as much as the women were, because that's just how wages worked back then, and nobody questioned it. The conference was actually taking place on World Equal Pay Day or something, whatever it was called, which was quite funny. I have a theory, I've had this for a very long time, that it would have been two different sets of people doing the silk and the gold, because the silk will catch on any bit of rough skin on your hands. You have to, salt scrub your hands and stuff to keep them nice and soft, and you have to learn how to handle the silk. But then the gold absolutely knackers your hands because it really roughens your skin. So I have a sneaking feeling that the men on the payroll were doing the gold work, and the women were probably doing the silk work, because there were silk women in London who were their own trade, and we know that a lot of the embroiderers were women. But it just makes sense for, when you've got a crew working on something, to have two different sets, because they are quite different skills, and underside catching is very hard on your hands. It needs a lot more strength, whereas the silk work needs delicacy, and it really roughens your skin. But I think, for a long time, I sort of ignored the Bayer tapestry. But what I found that I really love with the Bayer is I'm not particularly interested in the military scenes, because I do not find military history interesting at all. After 17 years of dating a reenactor who's just obsessed with swords, when I met my current partner, Gareth, about 16 years ago, he was helping me unload the van. I had a Viking sword in because I'd just done a school there. And I handed it to him, and I thought, oh God, here we go. He's going to be waving it around thinking he's Zorro. And I handed it to him, and he just said, where do you want me to put this? And I just thought, oh my God, that's the sexiest thing I've ever seen a man do. But the little marginal scenes in the Bayer tapestry, I think, are absolutely wonderful. And one of the things that you do see in the Bayer tapestry is sometimes they just outline a figure. And sometimes I think it's definitely done for effect, because below the main battle scenes, one of my favourite scenes is there's a little figure of a series of about a dozen archers, and they're in profile like little Egyptian figures. And they just outline in blues and greens and grey, so that they look like snipers fading into the mist, which is what they were. Whereas other scenes, like figures, are just outlined in the main thing. And I think, if you've got a crew of sort of 6, 8, 10 people working on a piece, and then you need to roll it along, if one person's having a bad day or is off sick, the forewoman's going to say, right, well, we can leave that bit just outlined, we'll move along. Because you can't have 7 people waiting for one to finish. And people will work at different stages, if you're not feeling up to it that day. So I think sometimes it was just expedience, and I think sometimes it was done for effect. But there is a lot of humour in all medieval art.
Tanya, can I just say thank you so much for what's been an absolute wonderful talk this morning, and I hope you've all enjoyed it too. But can I just say thank you? Can we all just say thank you?
And thank you from our online viewers also. They were really, really, they found the talk really wonderful.
Thank you.